Hello, boys and girls. This is going to be how, if you are choosing to do our last unit of reading workshop, how that we'll be able to go about doing that. Hopefully you've been able to find a fantasy book. A fantasy book is anything that is the setting or the storyline is something that can't happen in real life. It could have like time travel in it. It could have magic in it. It could have creatures that don't really exist. Anything like that would be considered a fantasy novel. So this is one of my favorite units. You should have your booklet that looks like this from your packet that we sent home. And this is my favorite unit because I love fantasy. I know many of you are not big fantasy readers, and some just don't really care for this genre, but some I do know do love this genre. I know for some of you, dragons, dwarves, time travel, epic quests, that's just not really your cup of tea, but I want to start talking to you about why we should read fantasy and why it is so important. So, if you look at this page in your booklet about session 1, it says why we read fantasy. And the first one is because stories are incredible. They're wild, they're dangerous, they have romantic tales where the fate of mankind may rest on the choices that's made just by one character. Everything is important. Everything's more intense, more vivid in fantasy stories. Another reason is when you study fantasy, you're really studying the human condition. The stories are never really about just elves and hobbits. They're about the struggle between good and evil, how power corrupts, the quest to be better than we are, how even the smallest of us can affect what happens in this world. And lastly, if you guys become powerful readers of fantasy, you're likely to become more powerful readers of all text. Fantasy novels are incredibly complicated. You have to figure out where the story takes place, what kind of world that is, who has the power, what are the rules. You'll enter the narratives that stretch over many novels, and you'll even read hundreds, even thousands of pages if you read all the books that are in these series. You'll emerge like the characters in the stories. Hopefully you're emerging changed, just like the characters did. So I want all of that for you. I want you to leave this classroom and embark on those wild adventures that make your head spin with these characters. I want you to feel that release that comes when you escape into other mythical worlds where magic happens. I want you to find stories that will spread over many books that will keep you up at night and fill the corners of your life with all of their secrets. You may or may not emerge from this unit a fantasy fanatic, but you will, I'm sure, know more about this wild and beautiful genre. You will have more insight into what it means to be human, and you will emerge with an increased confidence that you can tackle truly complicated text. So today, I want to teach you that a fantasy reader, your first task is to figure out not just where your story happens, but what kind of place it is. And one way you can do this work is to investigate clues about the time period and important magical elements. Use the cover, use the blurbs on the back, details from the beginning of the story to really figure out where is this story taking place? What kind of place is it? So on this page in the middle down here, you see that there's 3 common fantasy settings. There's the medieval world, futuristic world, and the ordinary world. So when we talk about the medieval world, we're talking about places that have like castles or dragons, might be full of swords and knights and things like that. A couple of stories that come to mind would be like Lord of the Rings, or even the Chronicles of Narnia would be set in a medieval world. Futuristic world, this world, these types of stories they might have something that's similar to how we like an ordinary world, but in one way or another, the world is different. You can definitely tell it has more of a futuristic tone to it. It might have more advanced technology. It might even be set in space or things like that. Some examples of this would be the Maze Runner series, the Hunger Games series would be the futuristic world. Some of you have read the Hidden Children series by Margaret Patterson Haddix. Those would be considered a futuristic society. And then the ordinary world is the last type of setting, where it seems like everything is normal, but then gradually you'll notice that there's an infiltration of magic or supernatural. So worlds like Harry Potter, you start learning about him, he lives in a world like we do, and then all of a sudden he realizes he's a wizard, and then he goes off to Hogwarts. The book, My Teacher is an Alien, that would be one too. It was totally normal, and then all of a sudden they found out that his teacher was an alien. Let's see another one. A Wrinkle in Time, which we just read. That definitely everything seemed normal, and then all of a sudden they were whisked away to some different place in space. So those are the 3 different types of settings that you would normally come across when we're thinking about settings. So fantasy readers need to gather up these clues right away about what kind of place they're in. This may be tricky because some may start out right away in a magical world where there are creatures that we know are fantasy, and other times it may start out in the ordinary world, and then the creatures are transported, like we just talked about with Narnia or Harry Potter or A Wrinkle in Time. So I've tried to jumpstart your reading a bit by giving you a little expertise in how fantasy stories tend to start. So that means I expect you, from the very beginning, to be alert about details about what kind of place you encounter in the books that you're reading. Things unfold very rapidly in fantasy, so you have to be oriented very quickly before a dragon might arrive, or you get swept through a portal into another world, or you get tessered away like they did in A Wrinkle in Time. So if you look at the bottom of our page here, where it talks about A Wrinkle in Time for the title of our book, where does the story take place? And I think it got cut off a little bit, but so when we talk about A Wrinkle in Time, where does it take place? Well, it started out at Meg's house. Remember, in the middle of a storm. It was an ordinary house, an old house. We learned a little bit later that it was kind of on the edge of town. But really, we need to think about what kind of place is it. It was an ordinary house. There wasn't anything out of the ordinary about it. Meg was going to school. She was having troubles at school. All of that seemed very ordinary. But then all of a sudden, when Mrs. Witch was introduced, that's when the magic started coming in, because I remember when it talked about how she kind of was very shimmering, and she said she wasn't going to appear totally because it wore her out too much. Then all of a sudden we start to really realize, hey, there's a magical element happening here in this story. And then it takes us off from there when Meg and Calvin and Charles Wallace are whisked away when they're tested to the planet Uriel. So then that's really where the fantastical part of the story starts to happen. And then after that, it's like just one thing after another that seems kind of very out of this world that's happening to our characters. So as I was just talking about, guys, this work is going to be very important now for you guys as readers to really be paying attention to this setting. The novels that you've chosen are complicated. The places will be unusual and significant, and you want to use the strategies you know to be alert to details about those places and their physical and psychological implications. So not just today, but whenever you pick up a complex novel, you want to research the place carefully. Use the covers, use the blurb, all the details in the beginning of the story to help you build that idea of what's happening and what might be coming in the story. So again, if you're reading some fantasy, these are the things you need to start off with as you're reading. If you need some suggestions on some good fantasy books, please let me know. I had one other picture that I was going to upload here. Let me see if I can do that now. Okay, so I think our picture, these are 2 books, A Wrinkle in Time. If you want to finish reading it, I suggest you can either start from the beginning again. It's not one I'll be able to read to you guys aloud, but we were in the chapter 7, The Man with Red Eyes. That's would be where I would suggest you start if you want to finish reading the book. That's an excellent fantasy one to do. One we were going to do as a read aloud was called The Thief of Always by Clive Barker. Another excellent one. But if you want some other suggestions on some good fantasy books to read, let me know. Both of these I do know are available on Libby. They are not on Hoopla, but they're on Libby. So you can check either one of these or both of these out. Or, like I said, there's some other excellent series out there about fantasies. Or if you need if you want some suggestions as to what kinds of books to be looking for, let me know. But again, too, it's your choice during this time to be reading some things that interest you and you guys enjoy as well. I would hope that you continue to follow these lessons as I upload them and work along with me in your books. Happy reading!